Joining the distinguished panel tonight, we have Katie Wood, who's the Legal and Governance Manager at Amnesty International, formerly a lawyer in commercial litigation. She joined Amnesty 12 years ago, first as a volunteer caseworker and then as campaign coordinator of the Human Rights and Security Campaign. Hugh is the Executive Director of the Human Rights Law Centre. He was previously the Director of the Victorian Federation of Community Legal Centres and the Brimbank Melton Community Legal Centre. And Kristen Hilton is the Director of Civil Justice and Access and Equity at Victoria Legal Aid and is the former Executive Director of Pilch. So the first question, which has come through on a tweet, what is the benefit of doing pro bono work? Kristen?
I think the benefits of doing pro bono work are manifold, and they accrue not just to the practitioner, also the person who's engaging in doing the pro bono work themselves, also to the person that they're assisting, but also to the community at large. And perhaps the best way to sort of explain that is to give a bit of an example. So I used to work at Pilch, and one of our flagship projects was the homeless person's legal clinic. And in the very early days, and still now, that program was significantly supported by the engagement of hundreds of pro bono lawyers throughout the state. And they were able to provide much more assistance than a small team of lawyers, a couple of lawyers who were funded to be in the centre day in, day out. And they were able to provide assistance on a range of matters to people who were experiencing all types of difficulties and people who were really some of the most vulnerable people in our community. So in addition to the assistance they were able to provide, whether that was trying to get fines waived, and anyone who's worked for the homeless person's legal clinic will be very familiar with the infringement system, whether it was challenging an unlawful eviction, whether it was just providing someone with information about what might be protected attributes under discrimination law, or whether it was trying to help someone access their entitlements under the social security system. Firstly, that person had a much better chance of getting that issue resolved. So that's the immediate benefit for the person. There was also a real benefit for the practitioner in that they were able to use their professional skills, firstly to speak to a client, and in the first couple of years I used to work in a commercial law firm, and my experience, maybe things have changed now, but I spent a good deal of my time in the bottom of the mobile building doing due diligence for the first couple of years, and I didn't actually get to meet many clients, so it was great to actually use your professional skills in an environment, so still working for a firm that supported pro bono activity in an organised and structured way to really make a difference to people's lives. But the third thing that work does is it creates a community of interest or a greater awareness around a social issue. So through doing work, through pro bono lawyers engaging in particularly working with homeless people, there was a much greater understanding of what homelessness is, how regularly it occurs in our community, what the legal dimensions of experiencing homelessness may be. And in that respect, I think there was a greater sort of overall concern and a greater awareness of the issue. So I think there are lots of benefits.
Hugh, what do you think? What's the benefit of doing pro bono work?
Well, I endorse everything Kristen said. From a personal perspective, pro bono is incredibly rewarding. It's a learning experience, and from a community perspective, it's about access to justice, it's about the community of interest, it's about areas of law, practicing in areas of law that are relevant to everyday people and helping them with their lives, and also organisations that help people in poverty and disadvantage.
Now, whilst we've been talking, David Husy has arrived. David is the Director of Programs at Plan International. We wouldn't send med students into the field without practice. Should law students need to do free pro bono for admission?
Short answer, I would say, is yes. If you're talking about international development or international placement, certainly in our organisation, in our sector, before we would send anyone into any field of practice around international development or child rights support work, they actually have to undergo a fairly kind of rigorous set of training, induction, meet a whole set of standards. I would think the same should apply to the legal law students and legal profession in terms of entering into practice. That if you're entering into an area of rights, and certainly my particular interest is children's rights and young people's rights, then the short answer is yes.
Now, Katie Wood, the pro bono, of course, is a contraction of pro bono publico, for the good of the public. Is pro bono work always good for the public?
Yeah, it really is. I mean, I can speak from Amnesty International's perspective, where we're actually the receivers of fantastic pro bono legal services. Our donors want to put money towards Amnesty International's great human rights work around the world. That's where their donation dollar is going towards. They don't want to put money towards a contract review for suppliers. They don't really want to put money towards drafting policies, internal policies. They want to see Amnesty International being able to do its magnificent human rights work around the world. So I really, and Amnesty really does benefit greatly from having our legal service providers give us that work for free. DLA, Parker, Clayton Needs, many others. You know, top lawyers in the country helping us with legal matters. And that's not just sort of internal commercial stuff like contracts, it's also helping us with more human rights oriented stuff. So human rights review of legislation that we might have questions around. Assisting us in providing advice on certain matters dealing with refugees or other areas of work that we're working on, such as Indigenous rights. So it's the whole gamut, if you like, of legal work that pro bono legal services providers are able to help us with.
I'm very interested in criminal justice and the way in which already vulnerable groups, particularly people with mental illness or disability, have difficulty navigating the system. A good example is infringements law and its lack of an appeal mechanism. Where do you think there are the greatest gaps in the law that affect these groups unfairly and are in need of reform?
I actually think the greatest gaps in legal access are in civil law, and I think in the current debate, which is focusing in the media around the legal aid cuts and the right to a fair trial, it's distracting attention from the huge unmet need in civil law and family law, and that's not to diminish the critical issues in criminal law. In the criminal justice sphere, of course, there's huge needs. What we're seeing in Victoria is a massive increase in prison population of 40 to 50% over the last 10 years. 1,700 new police, 940 new protective services officers. You don't put on law enforcement numbers like that without creating downstream pressure on the courts and on legal aid and on community legal centres. Police are more efficient now due to some good criminal procedure reforms and also some bad reforms which make it easier for police to hand an infringement out in circumstances where they previously would have had to issue a summons, like for offensive language, and shop steal, I think, under $500 and a couple of other offences. So all that trend does is create more demand for community legal centres for legal aid. It puts pressure on the system. It means that it creates greater risk that we know who's made up in the criminal justice system. If you look at the prison population in Victoria, 6.5% of male prisoners finished high school. So the vast majority of male and female, it's about 18%. Vast majority of prisoners didn't finish high school. If we can keep people in high school, we're on the right way to stopping crime. But where's our money going? It's going into prisons, it's going into police, it's going to PSOs, it's not going to the prevention scale. And all of that is creating pressure on the system, which then creates risks that vulnerable people fall through the gaps. And fines, I believe that we'll be seeing, and Kristen probably knows about this more than I do, but many more people in jail simply because they don't have the money to pay fines and because they didn't have proper access to a lawyer at the point in which they were about to be sent to jail for unpaid fines.
Now, there's a question that naturally follows from that. We all know that ultimately legal aid is the place where access to justice is made possible for those who qualify. And without that aid, many people will not get anything like access to anything like justice. To fill the void, and it's a growing void, many people do pro bono work. Should there be a limit to how much pro bono work people do in order to keep the pressure off governments to fund legal aid adequately?
Well, it's an interesting question. I mean, I'm not sure that I think that there should be a limit on the amount of work that pro bono practitioners provide, but I do think it's really important to measure the amount of pro bono work that's being done and capture the amount of pro bono work that's being done. And I think that that's been an excellent development, particularly here in Australia and increasingly nationally, where pro bono work is counted. So firms are getting better at understanding where their pro bono dollars are going and getting better at prioritising what sort of pro bono work they do, and then counting it on a state or national basis, because unless you can evaluate how much work is being done by the private profession, you don't really get an understanding of how they're not so much propping up the system but helping to meet the gap. And I think that that's very important for the government to understand that, we've had some really interesting research this year in the form of the Legal Australia-wide survey, which was the law survey, and it's the most comprehensive legal needs assessment or legal needs survey that's ever been undertaken in Australia. And that shows that there is huge unmet legal needs throughout the country. And it would be, it's very difficult to read that and not think that there needs to be greater funding to legal assistance services in the form of legal aid commissions and community legal centres. And pro bono is a really important part of that, not just because it helps meet a gap, but for the other reasons which we identified. It's rewarding, it increases your skill set, it delivers sort of greater professional expertise. But yes, I think, no, there shouldn't be a gap, but it really needs to be carefully monitored, recognised, and it needs to be part of that overall funding picture.